I just need to start the recording, so we are underway officially. Just let me know you guys can all hear me okay, and we'll get into it. So yeah, this is your second class with me so far, but is technically your third because I've done a short recording of a class. I think if you've watched, you kind of have an idea of how I'm going to operate. I'm going to give you these longer classes, and then hello, Pranita. Going to give you these longer live classes and then shorter little lessons in between. The last one was about half an hour. I'll try and keep this up, the next one a bit shorter than that. But that's how it's going to kind of operate, where I basically aim to give you 4 kind of learning or contact experiences per learning unit so that you really get a good idea of what it is that we're going to be doing. This evening, we are going to be talking about a couple of things. I'm going to first talk a bit about the concept of the Western as a genre. You can see I put a picture up here on my slides of Mr. Clint Eastwood, who's one of the great American actors and also one of the great movie stars of the American Western movie. I'm sure you've watched a Western in some kind of a form, right? It's kind of the classic American movie genre set in a classic American location in what they call the West, like California, Texas, Arizona, kind of places in America that look a bit like the Karoo does in South Africa, I would say. Very striking, stark, beautiful landscapes, peopled by tough characters who follow sort of the law, but are more inclined to follow a personal code in pursuit of justice as they define it, going up against villains, going up against bad guys, and sometimes in the pursuit of love, sometimes in the pursuit of money, sometimes in the pursuit of revenge. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Western this evening and then cover a long scene that comes in the middle of this movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. About a 20-minute scene called the Spahn Ranch scene. I've asked you to watch it, to pay close attention to it when you watch it, and also just rewatch it again via the couple of clips I found over on YouTube. It's a really important scene. It happens in about the middle of the movie, and the way I'm going to explain it to you is that it is itself kind of a mini movie within the movie. It's kind of a Western within the film. In the previous recording I made for you guys, I spoke about how much Quentin Tarantino is interested in making films that refer to other films. He loves to make movies in which other movies appear or are referenced. There's a fancy word for that called intertextuality. What that means is just that a film shows off its knowledge of other films, and it makes a reference, knowing reference, conscious reference to other movies all the time in order to drive home some kind of broader meaning or point or purpose the film has. So I'm going to be showing you tonight how, in reproducing the classic elements of a Western and repackaging them in a modern movie, Quentin Tarantino tries to create an interesting meaning or purpose for his film. And what that meaning or purpose is kind of up to interpretation. I have some sort of an idea, and we'll get into it hopefully by the end of class. Here's a quote just to ponder quickly by one of the world's most famous and best known Western film directors. He was actually not American himself. He was an Italian. His name was Sergio Leone. He made what is called spaghetti westerns. They are American westerns that he made sometimes in Italy, but also very often in America too. It's kind of ironic that one of the greatest Western film directors ever was an Italian guy. And he said that cinema must be a spectacle. That's what the public wants. And for me, the most beautiful spectacle is that of the myth. That's an interesting idea to think about. Cinema is a spectacle. So it's something that wows you. It kind of knocks you off your feet. It's an event. It's not something quiet and calm. It's something that kind of just rocks your world, right? And the most beautiful spectacle, he said, is the myth. Okay, a myth is a collective story that a society has and tells about itself. It's a kind of a story that everybody buys into or believes in. And it's a story that contains not only the social norms and wisdom of a society, but also in a way embodies its national character, right? Americans view the Western as its own foundational myth because the Western captures something about how America as a country was started and how it began. And it also captures something about how Americans see themselves as a people, as being tough, as rugged, as people who had to conquer in order to survive, as people who live by their own internal moral code rather than having a code imposed upon them by the government. And this is a strand of thinking that exists very strongly in America to this day, where people are, tough, rugged. They like their Second Amendment, their guns. This is a bit of a caricature, but it's also part of the American myth. It's the foundational story. Every society needs its foundational story, something that explains why we exist, what we're for, and what it is that we value and want to do. And many people have argued that the Western is one of the myths that help Americans to understand how their society works. I'm going to just try something here very quickly. I'm not sure if this is going to work. Forgive me if it doesn't work. I'm just going to try to share my screen so that you can see on YouTube something. I'm not going to play. No, sorry. Wrong button. I'm just going to play a few seconds from a YouTube clip and see if you recognize this song. Let's see how this goes. Hopefully you can see that and hear it. I'm not sure if you can hear this, but this is a classic song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's Clint Eastwood, some other dude, and some other dude. So I'll stop playing there because I don't want to eat up people's data in case you. I'm not sure if you're able to hear that or if it worked or not. But what I was playing there was the classic main theme song of the famous Western movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Instantly recognizable, very famous these days, still to this day, I should say. And whenever you hear it, it kind of triggers very quickly the world of the Western, right? And what is the Western specifically? What are its features as a genre? You don't have to know all of this stuff. By the way, I'm not going to test you on it. Here we go. It's cowboys, isn't it, right? I'm not going to test you on all this stuff. You don't have to make a whole bunch of notes about it. And I've just got it off Wikipedia. And yes, you're not allowed to use Wikipedia, but it is a good place to get a first understanding of something. It can be quite useful. And as it says in Wikipedia, the Western is a genre of fiction. It's a made-up stories, typically set in the American frontier, the Old West or the Wild West. It's set between 1849 and 1890, somewhere on California, Arizona, Texas, and commonly associated with folk tales of the Western United States. Folk tales are also like fairy tales, right? So fairy tales are these things that contain a cultural wisdom, folklore. The frontier is often depicted in Western media as sparsely populated, hostile region patrolled by cowboys, outlaws, sheriffs, and numerous other stock gunslinger characters. They often concern the gradual attempts to tame the crime-ridden American West using wider themes of justice, freedom, rugged individualism, which is important for the American character, manifest destiny, the idea that God gave these people America to run as a country and live in as a country, and the national history and identity of the United States. So Westerns are kind of almost cheesy, formulaic movies, but their formula is tightly linked to how Americans see and understand themselves as a nation, and became the story they use. I'll show you just a little bit more here. Refer you to this part. The popular perception of the Western as a story that centers on the life of the semi-nomadic wanderer, usually a cowboy or a gunfighter. A showdown or duel at high noon featuring two or more gunfighters is a stereotypical scene in the popular conception of Westerns. And above here, the Western depicts a society organized around codes of honor in personal, direct, or private justice, frontier justice dispensed by gunfights. So this idea of like the individual, the outlaw, who is a kind of the hero, but also the anti-hero. He's good, but he's not good all the way down. He's kind of like a knight errant who goes on adventures and dispenses justice as he sees fit. It's not a justice of the nation, state, or the religion. It's the justice that the individual cowboy, gunslinger, outlaw decides is right based on his own personal moral inner code. It's a very romantic, capital R idea that the individual has a special personal knowledge that reigns supreme and that can be captured and expressed in story form. And for modern day audiences, that story form becomes movies. And throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up to the 70s and 80s, the cowboy genre, the Western genre, was just a movie that was made endlessly in America. TV shows, movies set in old times, set in modern day American cities, often starring Clint Eastwood, actually. And indeed, in the film, we see a Western TV show which Rick Dalton stars in called Bounty Law. And in the film as well, we're going to see how Quentin Tarantino actually, without saying so, seems to recreate a Western within the movie of his own. Anything else? Just also that this idea of the Western kind of repeats across societies too. You'll find it in British culture as well as Japanese culture. So it's not restricted just to American national myths. Here's just a few clips from, not clips, but stills from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is a very, very famous Western. I'm showing you this just so that you can compare it later in your mind to what we see in the Spahn Ranch scene. Quentin Tarantino actually lifts this, basically steals the scene and puts it right in his movie. And he's very well known for doing that, basically just recreating scenes from famous movies with a little bit of a tweak and giving it a little bit of a new, so that he can give it a whole new meaning. But you see the sparsely populated, not very many human beings around, things being in a kind of state of disrepair. This is not a place where life thrives. It's not a place where there's law. There's just the law of the rugged individual. Here's another still shot from it. Kind of looks a lot like the Karoo here in South Africa. The other thing that Sergio Leone is famous for is his inventive use of camera movement. So he was well known as using a guy who did these super close-up shots of characters, usually their eyes, right? The eyes are the window to the soul. His movies aren't that dialogue heavy, and he would express a lot through visuals. And using these super close-up where the camera would really push up on the character and get the intensity of the eyes. You see Tarantino do that a lot as well. Tarantino has a camera that is very active. It's almost like the camera is a personality or a character in and of itself. It moves around a lot. It's almost like the camera knows it's a camera, and so it behaves like one. Tarantino is always trying to find an interesting angle to shoot something from, something surprising. He loves to push the camera up very close to a character's face like this in almost a kind of self-aware way, where the camera, you kind of feel as though you are watching a movie. He uses the camera in a way to remind you that you're looking at this through a camera. Then you also get the opposite of it, where a Western will pull away from the character, and then you just see a lonely man in the middle of the shot, surrounded by this hostile territory, and on he goes to his next adventure, on his next mission. Tarantino will do that a lot, where he pulls the camera away to give us a sense of distance. So you feel like the camera is doing a lot all the time. It's got a lot of personality, energy, movement. And that is what also mirrors the mood of the time. The 60s were a time of dynamism, movement, self-awareness. So the camera behaves in the same mood as the period the movie is shot in. Here's an inventive picture from The Good, the Bad, and Ugly, where we see one of the characters looking at the noose that he's about to be hanged from, and the camera looks through the noose at the character. So you get a sense of like the camera is a funny, humorous thing. And I'm showing you all this because Tarantino uses the camera in the exact same way. He's a very self-aware director. So let's look at some scenes from the Spahn Ranch here quickly. Again, this is a scene that happens in about the middle of the film. It's an unusually long scene, actually. There's a lot that happens in it. It's about, like I said, 20 minutes long, so it's unusually long for a scene to happen. If you just watch it, it's also just kind of self-contained. Like if you just watched this sequence unfold over 20 minutes, you will feel as though you've watched a movie in and of itself, a short movie in and of itself. It's what you would call in, say, a season of television, a bottle episode or a chamber piece. It's like a small story, self-contained, that can exist by itself, almost outside the existence of the larger movie in which it is set. It kind of makes coherent sense if you just watched it by itself, that you've seen something that has a storyline, recognizable characters, its own little plot with its resolution, and even a kind of interior meaning that you can work out. Okay. By the way, if you guys have any comments or questions about something that I'm saying, please, you're more than welcome to come on mic and ask away, or just leave a message in the chat box. Sometimes the message appears on my screen and then disappears quite fast, so I might not fully catch it. If I don't, I will come back at the end of the class to answer any questions you can have for me. So let's tuck into the Spahn Ranch thing, just to give you a little bit of context in case you're not sure if it was something you missed in the movie. The Spahn Ranch is a real place. It actually exists. I don't know if it still exists to this day, but it existed in the year 1969, the year the movie is set. And the ranch was owned by this guy whose name was George Spahn, hence the name Spahn Ranch. And basically what it was is a huge studio lot where they filmed Westerns. So this place is a place that used to be a place where they shot Western movies. It's got a kind of a fake Western town built on it, but the whole thing, the whole lot is now in a state of disrepair. George Spahn is old. He's kind of, I wouldn't say he's on his deathbed, but he is in bed a lot. He can't get out of bed. He's blind. And this ranch that he owns has been taken over by the hippies that I was telling you about in the first class. The 1960s was a time of hippies, turn on, tune in, drop out. About 20 hippies have moved in here. They don't really seem to work. They only leave the ranch to go kind of dig around the city of Los Angeles for trash or drugs or something like that. So they've turned the ranch into their commune. And the way that our hero, one of our hero characters, Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt, arrives at the ranch is that he picks up one of these hippies in the street. She asks him for a lift. She is, she's like, it looks like a teenage girl. He can't quite tell if she's an adult or not. He's kind of aware that he shouldn't really be doing this, that she might be a bit flirty with him. So he's going to be very careful. He just wants to give her a lift home. When she tells him that her home is the Spahn Ranch, it clicks for him as a place he's been to before. He knows where it is because when he was still working as a stunt double for Rick Dalton, they shot TV shows, Bounty Law, at the Spahn Ranch. So he knows it. He knows George Spahn, the owner. He hasn't been back for a good 7 or 8 years, and he wants to see George, and he wants to, go back to an old haunt of his to see what it looks like now. And he's also interested that, and this is the interesting part, is that Brad Pitt so far, Cliff Booth, has been portrayed to us as kind of a bad guy. He's a bit of a loser. He's kind of has a bad, dodgy past. It's kind of accepted in the world around him that he was either responsible for his wife's death or that he murdered her and he got away with it. And there's a very short flashback scene where it's pretty clear that in the reality of the film, Cliff Booth did indeed murder his wife and get away with it. He also kind of doesn't really follow the rules. He goes his own way. He has his own kind of internal moral code, which is a little bit invisible to us for most of the movie up until this point. So Brad Pitt is, the way I see it anyway, is like he is a bit of an outlaw. He's a guy who lives around the margins of society. He is a likable guy. He's got a good demeanor. He's a loyal friend to Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio. He seems to have goodness, but he is also bad. He does bad things. He's also a former soldier. He was a Green Beret in World War II, so he probably killed a lot of guys in World War II. So he has this capacity for violence. That makes him, in my view anyway, I could be wrong, there's other interpretations available too, but that makes him, for me, kind of a cowboy figure. He's a mixture of good and bad. He doesn't live his life according to the laws of the country or a discernible religion or larger ideology. He's governed purely by an inner moral compass of his own. And this scene is interesting because it's the first time we get to see what that moral compass is. And he very quickly, and he doesn't say it, but just through his acting. This is a movie. Yeah, it's one long movie. It's like 2.5 hours or so. But the way the movie's structured is that it is actually very episodic. So it has these long scenes that don't seem to connect to each other. And it's put together in quite a strange way. And it's only once you get to the end that you realize how all those strange little episodes in the movie tie up together and form one coherent story. But this is the first time we get to see what Brad Pitt's all about. We get to see that he, just in his performance, he doesn't say it, but in the way he acts it out, is that he thinks something is wrong at Spahn Ranch. Something is off. And he wants to investigate, not just to catch up with an old friend and to revive old times, but because he senses something is wrong. He doesn't like these hippies. They're up to no good. doesn't like the way they live. Something about them is off. They're doing something wrong. Are they abusing George? Are they taking advantage of him? Are they looking after the ranch properly? I want to go see, because if something is wrong, I'm going to put it right. And that's a very outlaw, cowboy, Western intention to get going. Right? And when he arrives, this is the shot we get. This is the shot from his car, from his Cadillac. And if you compare that to the earlier one I showed you from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, this one, it's very similar, isn't it? You can see Tarantino's hugely inspired by the Western genre. He's just basically stealing shots from other older movies, right? Yeah, you can call it the ranch. I guess in American, you'd have to say ranch, right? The Spahn Ranch, as they would call it. But it's a ranch, so that basically means it's a kind of large open area, kind of like a big small holding or a plot of land where they ride horses and so on. Yeah, it's the movie is kind of confusing and just has these disconnected scenes in it. But it only really comes together at the end. And that's kind of why I wanted to focus on this sequence, because this is the sequence where we start to get a clue as to what the heck Tarantino is trying to do. And he has all of these, and I think the key lies in the idea of this thing being a Western. Like here is, even on this ranch, they have people dressed up as cowboys and they're on horses. And what's happened is that the ranch has become like a fake Western, is that it's got all these elements of a Western. Yes, it is on Netflix still, and you can watch it there. It's got all these elements of a Western, but it's like a fake Western. Like it's a Western that's lost its core meaning or its authenticity. It's just been it's been rendered into a place where you pretend to be a cowboy rather than you actually are one. Here's a picture of Brad Pitt, and at this point, little clues start to emerge, which also put Brad Pitt's character onto a line of thought that something is wrong here, something isn't right. This is a girl, probably underage girl, who's trying to seduce him. She says something to him like, "Charlie's gonna love you." What she's talking about there is Charles Manson, who never appears in the scene. He actually hardly appears in the movie at all. He pops up in the beginning, briefly, for a few seconds, but we never actually see Charles Manson again. He's just hinted at or mentioned briefly. And so this is Brad Pitt, kind of the Lone Ranger, the solitary, rugged, tough individual coming into a Western town, a place that looks like a Western town that has gone wrong. It's been taken over by bad actors. Somebody in it is vulnerable, and that vulnerable person must be looked after and taken care of. And this is like a classic, Western movie setup, where the outlaw comes to a strange town, the stranger comes to town, and has to set things right according to his own internal moral compass, right? And here's another little shot from the film. We can see Spahn's movie ranch on a flatbed truck over there. In the background, we see all these other hints of like a Western movie. We see this is called, there's the saloon, and it's got this kind of famous stereotypical saloon doors. So everything is indicating to us that what we're actually watching here is a Western. And indeed, one of the characters who's part of this hippie crowd, also known as the Manson family, is Tex. And Tex is kind of a capable guy. He's a horseman. He's dressed like a cowboy. He's got a cowboy's name, Tex, which is kind of short for Texas because he's from Texas. He's riding a black horse, which is kind of also a sign of a villain. A villain rides the black horse. He's got the cowboy hat on. He talks like a cowboy. He handles himself like a cowboy. And he is asked by all the women on the ranch to come and just check Brad Pitt out, because we've got a stranger in town. Can you just come and chat to him and read him, see that he's safe? And so I think that we as the audience are kind of conditioned to expect some kind of a face-off between these two guys. Tex is the bad guy. Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt, is the good guy. And they're going to have the classic Western showdown, the shootout, the duel, guns at high noon. But that doesn't actually happen. Instead, Brad Pitt kind of charms his way through. He impresses Tex by saying to him, I was once in jail. I was in a chain gang. It's kind of signaling to him that, like them, he is a bad dude. He's a bad guy. He's not a good guy. He's not coming in here to disrupt their lives or to expose them. He's one of them, in a sense. And so that expected conflict between good and bad is delayed. Tex goes away. He goes back to riding his horse and looking after the tourists in the hills, and it's delayed, the conflict. And that is also what Tarantino does throughout the film, is that he keeps on delaying the moment that we're all expecting, which is the murder of Sharon Tate. It's coming. We're expecting conflict. We know that, we also know that Tarantino's movies are very violent affairs, but he keeps on just withholding the key, the kind of climactic, extreme violence that he knows for. He dangles in front of us like a carrot and then takes it away from us again, never quite giving us what we want. And his movie is like that, keeps delaying. And in that delay, we also have a sense of kind of unbearable tension. The tension ratchets up because we know eventually something bad is going to happen. Some extremely violent event is going to occur. But we are kept waiting for it throughout the film. And the film seems to take all of these weird, loopy side tracks and goes in odd, unpredictable directions, and it can feel very disorganized and a bit it's like it would be called a shaggy dog story. It's just a rambling mess, but it isn't. These things all actually eventually tie up into something coherent by the end of the story, and all the little pieces that seem disorganized actually are in exactly the right place as we go through it. Like, why does this scene have to exist in the film? Why does he have to do this? There'll be two reasons why, and I'll get to those pretty soon. So what Cliff Booth does is that he then asks to see George, and this makes the hippies angry because they fear that he is actually there to expose them and to get them kicked off the ranch, because they probably are actually taking advantage of poor George Spahn. So what Brad Pitt does is he goes up to one of the little kind of cabins and where George Spahn lives, and it's kind of guarded by this red-headed female hippie who won't let him in. And so they have a bit of a back and forth, a bit of a face-off. So we've actually already had two conflicts. We've had Cliff versus Tex, first of all. Now we've got another one very shortly after, Cliff versus this red-headed lady. And it's both times there haven't been physical battles. They've been a battle of wits, or battle of intelligence, or battle of psychology, where Brad Pitt has to kind of outthink, but eventually also out-threaten his opponent in order to get past them and move into another place, right? So that's a kind of the duel. The face-off has been turned into something a bit safer and more psychological than a straight up shootout. Okay. And then Brad Pitt gets into this cabin, and here you can see on the walls, it's a very spooky scene because the music changes a little bit. This cabin is in a shocking state. It looks absolutely filthy. Everything here is in a state of disrepair, and it's a very sad, neglected place. It looks as though it's just been overtaken by kind of sadness and time. So this once glorious, pristine Hollywood studio lot has just been turned into something of a dumping ground for people and things and animals. You can see a few remnants of its time as a studio. We've got I'm not sure what this picture is, but you can see it's a cowboy. And this is a classic still of a TV show called The Lone Ranger, which is very popular in the 1950s and 60s in America. So you have all these little indications of the Western coming up. While itself, this actual sequence is itself a Western on its own. And another feature of the Western that is brought out here or expressed is that we see Brad Pitt going into the shadows, into the darkness, as he travels back in time to see somebody he knew from a long time ago. And that's another thing Westerns do, is that the hero character often has to confront his past, has to confront his own personal history, or a figure from his past whom he wronged or wronged him, or whom he had some kind of a relationship with, a meaningful relationship. And he has to confront the past and overcome the past in order to realize what his mission in life is, or what his destiny is. That confronting with what has come before is a very popular stereotypical trope in Westerns. And he goes to see George, and George he's in a terrible state. He's confined to his bed. He's gone blind. They have a very strange back and forth because George doesn't recognize Cliff. And Cliff is kind of constantly trying to remind him of who he is, but George does not trust him. And basically, out of this interaction, Cliff gets absolutely nothing, except for the fact that this whole arrangement is just super weird and super creepy. The first time I watched the movie, this scene, I don't know why, but the scene really freaked me out, especially the George Cliff discussion, because I just felt like something absolutely terrible was going to happen, something gruesome. He was going to find like a rotting corpse hanging from the ceiling, or like maggots and disgusting stuff. He doesn't, but just the feeling of being almost in a horror movie kind of overwhelmed this particular part of the sequence for me. And it was just super creepy. And Brad Pitt gets a sense of creepiness. And that the creepiness, I think, comes from the feeling that there is, it does. The feeling, the reason why it's creepy, I think, is because you have a mini society here on Spahn Ranch. You've got men, you've got women. They're a family. They are called the Charles Manson family. There's a patriarchal figure living there who's George Spahn. He's the typical masculine father figure, right? But everything is subverted. It's all backwards, and it's all in an unnatural order. The patriarchal figure is supposed to be a figure of strength and authority, is blind. He's reduced to lying in bed all day in the darkness, shut away and hidden, while the place is actually run by young people, and a lot of them are women. Not very many men are in this family of theirs. So it's like that old order, the old patriarchal order, has been overturned and put into an unnatural new order that doesn't really work, because everything's been left in a state of repair, and you've got disrepair. And you've also got all these hints of a glorious old past that have been destroyed and taken away. These hints of what used to be, the movies and TV shows that were made here. If you go back here, how this was once a glorious movie set that functioned and told great stories and was the origin point of the American national myth and character. How this place has fallen into neglect and destruction and subversion and is being run now by people who actively want to see that story destroyed and forgotten. And now Brad Pitt comes into that sequence, picks up on this psychologically, almost spiritually, and understands that this whole thing represents the new America, the America that the 60s promises, which is of chaos, disorder, overturning of the old and replacing it with something new that is unpredictable, dangerous, and perhaps not very healthy, right? That's an interpretation you can have on it anyway. There's other ways to see it, and I might be wrong, but I think Tarantino is hinting at something like the old American order has gone away. The old myths are dead. We don't respect them anymore. And so our society has become lost, and we are losing something. Something about the American character is being destroyed in the way the way that these people have destroyed the ranch and the Western, so we are doing it to our society. And you've got to remember the movie was released in 2019. So Tarantino is, I think, cleverly trying to say something not about the 60s, but about contemporary, modern, recent America, okay? So that's a kind of a meaning he's trying to generate by giving us this Western, subverting the Western, and then perhaps trying to provoke us to feel that sense of unease and creepiness when something foundational and important is left to rot and be destroyed. After that, he leaves. After this weird discussion that goes nowhere, he leaves. And again, it's a sense of like another conflict. George and Cliff, they fight, they argue more than actually discuss about the past fondly. So it's another kind of a face-off, another conflict that is a battle of wills or intellects rather than a battle of fists or guns or knives, right? It's the third time we've had two characters face off against each other in a Western-style duel that doesn't really go anywhere. That kind of disappoints. When Brad Pitt leaves George's little weird, creepy cabin of horrors, he comes out, and now the community, the Manson family, has actively turned against him. And you can see a series of shots Tarantino uses there. These long shots shot behind Cliff's shoulder, showing all the family, the Manson family, this cult, arranged in the distance in a line against him, kind of like you would see army soldiers lined up against you. So now he's placed in a position as being the enemy. And importantly, this is one of the things why the scene is so important, is because that establishes for us as the audience that Cliff Booth, this ambiguous kind of figure with a dark, shady past, capable of bad things, Cliff is actually the good guy, and these people are the bad guys. So we have a classic, again, Western-style duel here, face-off, good versus bad. They don't like him, they suspect him. The young girl to whom he gave the lift has turned against him, and she says that, what is she? She screams as he walks away from her. She climbs on top of something and points at him and screams something at him. Completely forgotten what, but something like, "You're the enemy," or "You're the crazy one, not us. You're the crazy one." Basically saying that, we have won here. We have conquered this ranch. We have conquered the idea of America, and we are remaking it. And you represent the old order, and you are the bad old order, and we wish to replace you. And we wish to replace the Western, and on top of the Western, we will build our new society. That's what the hippies were really all about. They were about kind of refashioning society, remaking it. And when Cliff gets to his car, his Cadillac, well, not his Cadillac, but Rick's Cadillac, he sees that he's got a flat tire. There's a knife in his tire. So playing with a little bit of metaphor here, you can see that his Cadillac is kind of like the cowboy's horse. It's his steed, the knight's steed, and the cowboy's horse. And his horse has been disabled. His horse won't go anymore. So he's a stranded cowboy, right? So that, again, to kind of drive home this theme of the Western being destroyed, we now have the last piece to fall, which is that the cowboy himself is immobile. He's no longer able to be nomadic. He's not able to move from place to place. So he's a weak cowboy now. But Brad Pitt quickly turns the tables. And this is now what gives us a clue as to what's going to happen in the rest of the film. And indeed why this particular scene is very, very crucial to what's going to happen subsequently. Because there's one of the hippies is sitting on like a fence near the car, and Brad Pitt says, "Did you do this to my car? Did you stick your knife in my tire?" And the guy kind of cackles manically or crazily, indicating that yes, he did. And then Brad Pitt says, "Well, now you're gonna fix it." And he takes out a wheel and jack and spanner and tells the hippie he's got to fix it. When the hippie doesn't fix it, Brad Pitt walks up to this guy, and you've got this kind of straggly blonde hair, this weird looking face. He's shirtless, he's got shoes on. He looks deranged and mad. And the contrast between Cliff Booth and this hippie is very strong, because Cliff is kind of physically handsome, good looking. He's got his hair in nice play, nice kind of style. He's dressed in a kind of interesting way. And he walks up to this hippie. And if you've watched the scene, you'll know what I'm talking about. But he basically, and then the way the camera moves here is very interesting too. It's got the Sergio Leone kind of thing going on, where we see Brad Pitt punch the guy in the nose. And we see it from the feet level. And we just see the hippie's feet lift off the ground as his body goes flying through the air backwards. Not sure if you've ever seen anybody get punched, or if you yourself have ever punched someone. But basically, it's not possible to punch somebody in the air and off their feet. It's not really physically possible, right? And so that's a very kind of typical thing of Tarantino, that when he shows violence, it's very often over the top, cinematic, exuberant, impossible, stylized violence, so that it is violent and often pretty gruesome and gory and filled with blood and broken bones and destroyed, mangled faces and bodies. But it's also violence that is quite cartoonish. In other words, it's not necessarily real violence. However, the way he uses sound and blood and crunching stuff, although it gives me kind of disturbs me, because he seems also to want to make his violence as entertaining and sometimes even as funny as possible. So he rides a very weird line between gruesome violence but also comic violence, between things seeming quite realistic but also being exaggerated, over the top, stylized and cartoonish. And that's how the scene plays out. He really wallops this guy, not once, but then he picks him up by the straggly hair and he breaks his nose in front of all the women, and then he does it again, and then he throws him against the Cadillac and forces him to fix the tire, which he does. So what we've had here is another confrontation, another kind of duel or shootout between good and bad. And this time it's been delivered. And what we've seen is that Brad Pitt is a force of good. He's like a good guy in a bad guy's body, right? And that's why the scene is so important, because it takes us through this Western style storyline with Western tropes. A stranger comes to town on his noble steed. He encounters something that is wrong, tries to work out what it is, confronts the past, confronts bad people over and over again, defeats them, and then puts the world to rights by the end of the story. So we know Brad Pitt is coded now as our cowboy hero, and that the hippies are bad, right? We also know that the movie is about the real life murder of Sharon Tate. And we know that these hippies, the Charles Manson gang, were the ones who did it. Okay. So you put these pieces together, and we as the audience are now in a state of some confusion and enticement, because we know that by the end of the story, Sharon Tate's going to be murdered. But Brad Pitt is the cowboy hero figure who is capable of defeating the hippies because he sees them for what they are. He sees the Charles Manson family for what they truly are. And he is able to stand up to them. So now we are left in a state of huge suspense as the audience, thinking, is he going to play some kind of role in Sharon Tate's life and death? What is Cliff Booth going to do? What is his role going to be? And if he, the cowboy figure, the Western Clint Eastwood figure, if he's the one who's going to somehow intervene or save Sharon Tate, then does that in turn create a larger meaning for the film as a whole and what it is trying to say? Okay, so think about that as an idea for a few days. Maybe rewatch the scene with all that I've just been saying, because I'm going to cover that in our next in my next shorter recording. What is it actually by the end of the film that Quentin Tarantino was trying to say? So that's what I want to cover next time. Just kind of absorb this information. Like I said earlier, it's an interpretation I have of the film. There's other ways you can see it too. But all you kind of got to do when you analyze these things or think about them deeply and write about them in an essay or in an exam is to kind of do what I've been modeling here, which is to interpret the film using the film itself as my kind of primary source of information, to kind of put together some kind of an argument about what the film is trying to do, referring to as many scenes and characters and incidences, moments of dialogue as I can to use as the evidence for what my ultimate argument is trying to be. So I hope that kind of came out of the lesson. It's also something that you have to do in your own work, is put together an argument, trying to tell me what you think the film is about, what its larger meaning is, and using as many incidents from the film, scenes or sequences as you possibly can. Just a couple of other small things to say is that as you watch the scene, you'll notice that it's got almost no music in it. The rest of the film is jam-packed with music. There's so much music all over the place. But in this scene, it's eerily quiet. It's as though culture and creativity and exuberance doesn't exist in this scene, in this place, because it's all been kind of destroyed. The playfulness, creativity, it's not allowed to flourish in a place that's been kind of overwhelmed by darkness and evil. And to finish off the scene, what happens is that Cliff gets his tire fixed, for one thing. Tex is called back. But before Tex can arrive and confront Brad Pitt, we see his Cadillac driving up out of Spahn Ranch, turning into the road and leaving. So Brad Pitt kind of avoids having to face off against Tex. But throughout the scene, we've seen like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different times where Cliff Booth, the cowboy, faces off against the bad person. But the ultimate final kind of fight against the real bad guy, the fully capable bad villain of Tex, is delayed. We don't get that. As an audience, we kind of get the sense that that's being saved up for later on in the story. So the climax of this film is going to involve Cliff Booth against the Charles Manson family. They are going to come, they're going to face off again. But when and how and what is going to happen? So already here we have a sense of Tarantino changing history, or suggesting that history in his film is not going to be the history of the historical record, what actually happened, but rather that it's something, it's like a material that he can play around with. It's like clay that he can use to reshape truth and give us a story that didn't happen, but which contains its own reasonable meaning. And I'm going to end there with one last quote from Sergio Leone, director of many Westerns, who said that when I was young, I believed in three things: Marxism, the redemptive power of cinema, and dynamite. Now I just believe in dynamite. I wanted to share that with you because I've been waxing lyrical here about the meaning of the movie and the purpose of using Westerns and what Tarantino is really trying to say. But it could just be what Tarantino is trying to do is have fun. Is just have a good time and try to tell as captivating and as playful and as interesting a story as he possibly can. That, anyway, is his prime motivation. If there's something broader he's trying to say, it's up to us, the audience, to try and work it out. Try to work out what it is. You know, does he have a political point of view? Does he believe that cinema can change our lives and give us a purpose and a meaning? Or is it just about, you know, explosions, gunfights, punching people in the face, and seeing good triumph over evil and getting a kick out of it? Could be all those things, could be some of them, but I do encourage you to stay tuned for the next class. So again, it'll be a short recording, which I will release hopefully by the 14th of August. It'll be maybe a sort of 20-minute video or so, in which I will cover the ending of the movie. So if you've seen the movie already, go rewatch the ending. It's about, going to be talking about the last 15 minutes of the film or so. If you haven't watched it yet, please make a priority of doing so. We'll be discussing the ending of the film in class next time. One other thing is that I have released an ice task for you guys to do. You will find it under blogs. It's activity 1.2.2. Okay, it's a pretty short one, and it is about a very short scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, about a 90-second scene or so. Go complete that ice task. I said the due date is August 21, but the way I work is that I leave the ice tasks open for you guys to do throughout the semester. 21 of August is just the time when I'm going to check in on the ice tasks and see what you guys have done and where you are and what maybe I need to give you some feedback on if necessary. But I'm going to leave the ice tasks open to do the whole semester, and probably ask you to make sure you've completed all the ice tasks, all 4 of them, sometime in early October. Okay, I have to get the ice marks in, I think probably by the middle of October. So the final due date for all the ice tasks will be then. It just gives you guys a lot of time to work on them and not to stress about them, because the ice tasks are all there for you to learn something from. Okay, I don't just set them up for you to do kind of for fun or anything like that. It's so that you can actually get something interesting out of them. So there's a question here about the reference that you told us to use for ice task 1. Are we looking at the referencing style only, or also what is written? Yes, at the referencing style. So I gave you a little bit of a sample to use, and there's a short video attached to that as well, where it explains to you how to use the Harvard referencing style for movies. So I just wrote that as a way for you to see what it should look like on the page. So there I'm asking you just to use that referencing style. You've got to use the Harvard referencing style for movies, which uses the director's surname, the date the movie was released on, and then the time stamp, which describes the time in the movie at which those scenes occur, or how long they last for. I don't know if there's a WhatsApp group for the module. I'm not running one myself, but if you guys are, then certainly let these people in. Anything else I needed to say? Okay, so we've done the class, I've spoken about the ICE task, and just to stay tuned for in the next few days, I'm going to release another short recording discussing the ending of the film. Hopefully I'll be able to tie together all these different strands I've been talking about, like movies within movies, Tarantino drawing on the genre of the Western, making a Western within this movie, and answering the question whether or not the whole movie isn't actually itself a Western. And if so, that's really his intention. What did he mean by that? Why did he do it the way he did it? Because here's a bit of a spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but basically Tarantino rewrites history by the end of the movie. He gives us a series of events that did not happen. Now, why the hell does he do that? Surely you're not allowed to do that. You can't just change history. You can't just make it become whatever you want it to be. That's not allowed. Okay? Well, Tarantino doesn't give a damn about that. He wants to create a history that is, in a sense, better. But why does he want to do that? What's the point of it? I will discuss that anyway in the next class. Okay, are there any other questions you guys have about the module, where we're going? Anything else you need? Another question for ICE Task 1, is it 100 words in total for both questions? Yes, the whole ICE Task is just meant to be 100 words. Focus on the camera angles, focus on how he uses the camera, the setting. The scene I'm talking about is set in a movie trailer. So the little trailer in which the actors used to live when they were making movies. And just got to be 100 words in total. So it's nice, quick, short, sharp, and covers something that I haven't spoken about in class, and allows you to apply the ideas I've been mentioning to that. And just make sure you reference it well, because the standard for referencing in ICE tasks is the same as for your assignments. Okay, all right. It was nice to talk to you guys. I'll hang around here for another 3 or 4 minutes, just in case you have questions. If you guys want to start a WhatsApp group, you can. We've got some numbers up here, so maybe somebody should take them down and get something going. But otherwise, if you want to contact me personally, please do so via VCLearn, or you can email me. Okay, let me just write my email here in the chat. gdouglas@varsity college. And I'm also going to stop the recording. Oops, wrong button.